The doctor recognized the millionaire patient, but she hid a secret for years. The shrill beep of the pager cut through the monotonous silence of that Thursday morning. Dr. Helena Santiago felt a familiar shiver run down her spine. It was the silent siren announcing the arrival of the emergency room. A break in the illusory calm that had settled over the few hours of nighttime respite. At Monte Sinai Hospital, one of the most prestigious in the capital, the digital clock on the wall of the nurse's station read to 37 a.m. She was exhausted, the hours dragging by with double shifts to make up for the gap left by a colleague on sick leave. Her glasses slipped slightly on her nose, betraying her accumulated fatigue. But her eyes, though heavy, retained the trained sharpness of a renowned cardiac surgeon. Dr. Helena, room 312. Emergency, the head nurse, Sonia, rang out in a tone that brooked no delay, adrenaline already coursing through her veins. Male patient, 50 years old, admitted with acute myocardial infarction. Very serious condition. Helena nodded, her mind already processing the information, reviewing protocols and visualizing possible scenarios. Her steps were quick and determined. Down the deserted corridor, the sound echoing in the silence of the sleeping hospital. Every inch of that institution was familiar. She practically grew up there, the daughter of one of the founders, dedicating her life to medicine, striving for excellence in every surgery, in every life saved. However, her reputation didn't exempt her from the grueling shifts, nor the challenges each new case brought. As they approached room 312, the hum of voices and the sound of medical equipment were already audible. Mixing with the palpable tension in the air, the door opened with a quick push from the nurse, revealing the chaotic scene. A hospital bed, surrounded by a medical team already in action, machines beeping frantically, wires and tubes connected to an inert body. Residents and nurses moved with coordinated urgency, injecting medications, checking monitors, trying to stabilize the patient. The smell of alcohol and disinfectant, so common in hospitals, seemed more intense there, mixed with the sweat of exertion. Helena took a step forward, her eyes sweeping the scene, absorbing the details, searching for the critical point, the flaw to be corrected, the life to be saved. It was then that her gaze fell on the face of the pale, unconscious man. On the bed, a surge of adrenaline, unlike that of a medical emergency, coursed through every fiber of her being. A chilling sensation invaded her, deeper than the hospital air conditioning. Time seemed to slow down, the hum of the monitors and the voices of the medical team becoming a distant buzz in her ears. She froze. It was him, Arthur D'Almonte. The name rang in his mind like a bell in an echo chamber, heavy and undeniable. One of the most powerful and influential men in the country. A tycoon whose decisions moved markets and influenced policies. His face, even disfigured by pallor and medical urgency, was unmistakable. The striking features, the aquiline nose, the jawline that once displayed implacable determination, it was all there, attenuated only by the unconsciousness imposed by the disease. Helena felt a lump in her throat, a strange mixture of shock, disbelief, and a kind of painful recognition. That man, in that moment, he wasn't the unattainable businessman, the big shot in the newspaper headlines, the name behind financial empires. He was just a patient, a frail body fighting for life, dependent solely on her hands, her mind, her knowledge. But to Helena, he was much more than that. He was a ghost from the past, a memory she had carefully sealed away in a dark compartment of her mind, locked away and forgotten. Dr. Santiago, the patient is in cardiogenic shock. We need to stabilize him so we can take him to catheterization. The voice of Dr. Philippe, a dedicated resident, snapped her out of her stupor. He didn't notice the brief hesitation, the split second in which Helena's professionalism wavered in the face of such an intense personal memory. Helena shook her head, forcing herself out of her stupor. This was no time for memories, for the past to invade the present with such brutality. Arthur D'Almonte's life hung by a thread, and his obligation, his oath, overrode any trace of personal emotion. She approached the bed, her usually serene blue eyes revealing a flicker of something unspeakable, an internal struggle no one else there sensed. Her hand, trained in precise incisions and delicate sutures, automatically checked the faint pulse in his neck. The skin was cool, clammy. The monitor beside the bed showed an alarmingly irregular heartbeat. Prepare the resuscitation protocol. Dr. Philippe, the vasoactive drugs, Nurse Sonia. The defibrillator on standby. Her voice was steady, professional, as always. No inflection, no tremor, on the outside. Dr. Helena Santiago was the personification of calm and competence inside. A whirlwind of newly awakened emotions threatened to destabilize her. As he gave orders, his nimble fingers worked, assessing the patient, his mind already drawing the map of a diseased heart, visualizing the clogged arteries. But behind all the technique and knowledge, a question echoed in his head: how? How, after so many years, after all the effort to move on and build a new life, had Arthur Dalemont reappeared in his life, and in the most unexpected and dramatic way possible? And how would she, Helena Santiago, the successful doctor he probably wouldn't even remember, handle having his life in her hands? The secret she'd kept for years, buried beneath layers of time and professional achievements, threatened to come to light with the presence of that unconscious man in room 312. The irony was cruel. He there, on the brink of death, and she, the only one capable of saving him, carrying a truth that could change everything. The shift that had begun as another grueling night of work had just become a test, not only of her medical skills, but of her ability to maintain the fine line between past and present, between personal and professional. The night had barely begun, and Helena knew it would be long and full of revelations, whether she wanted it to be or not. Okay, I understand the second chapter. The focus now is on the intensity of Helena's memory and the gravity of the secret. I'll expand on this, maintaining the tension and emotional depth. Chapter 2. A name she never forgot. Room 312 was a whirlwind of activity. But to Dr. Helena Santiago, the sound of the monitors and the voices of the medical staff seemed muffled, as if coming from underwater. As the nurses and residents moved with the desperate agility required for a massive heart attack, Helena took a step back, bracing herself against the cold wall of the hallway adjacent to the room. She needed a moment, a single, precious moment, to assimilate the brutal reality that had just crashed into her. Her breathing was labored, shallow despite all her training to remain calm under pressure. Bile rose in her throat, a harbinger of nausea that she fought to suppress. Her eyes, previously so focused on the medical emergency, were now fixed on the digital chart one of the nurses had left on the nurses' station counter. The name flashed on the illuminated screen, unmistakable, relentless, Arthur Dalemont. Seeing that digitized name, so formal and concrete, was like having a long locked door ripped from its hinges by brutal force. The memory she carried was not just a reminder, but a deep scar, a secret buried for over 15 years, a secret she had striven to crush under the weight of a brilliant career, a life meticulously built brick by brick, far from the shadows of the past. Helena closed her eyes for a second, her fingers clenched, her nails digging into her palms in an attempt to ground herself. 15 years of sleepless nights studying, exhausting internships, complex surgeries, professional victories and defeats, all to erase the person she had been, the mistakes she had made, and above all, the undeniable connection. With Arthur Dalemont, she had sworn to herself that she would never look back, that the past would stay where it belonged, buried. But there he was, a patient on the brink of death, and she, Dr. Helena Santiago, one of the most respected cardiac surgeons in the country, the only one who could save him. The irony was a sharp blade, cutting deep into her soul. An image of a distant time, of a much younger and more naive Helena, floated through her mind. A Helena who believed in fairy tales, who dreamed of a future different from the one reality imposed on her. A Helena who met Arthur Dalemont under completely different circumstances. He wasn't the tycoon Arthur, the name plastered across business magazines. He was a different Arthur, a man who somehow left an indelible mark on her life. Recognition came not just from his public persona, but from a more intimate knowledge, from a shared past she had worked tirelessly to forget. If the secret were to come to light, the consequences would be catastrophic. Her reputation, built with so much sacrifice and dedication, would crumble like a house of cards. The prestige of Mount Sinai, the trust of her colleagues, the admiration of her students, everything would be at risk. This could mean the end of her career, the annihilation of everything she was today. There was no room for personal relationships with patients, especially with a past as complex and murky as the one she shared with Arthur. The ethical guidelines were clear, unyielding, and Helena's secret, if revealed, transcended any professional ethics. It was a ticking time bomb, a constant threat. She opened her eyes, staring at Arthur's pale face through the glass in the bedroom door. The anguish was almost unbearable. How could she, an exemplary professional, maintain the impartiality necessary to save the life of a man who held the power to destroy hers? The line between her Hippocratic oath and her own survival seemed to have blurred, leaving her in a dangerous limbo. Dr. Helena Santiago has always been known for her unwavering resilience, her ability to separate emotion from reason. But at that moment, emotion was a raging river overflowing its banks. Arthur Delmont's heart was pounding, and so was hers, but for very different reasons. Dr. Santiago, he's getting worse. We need your decision now. Dr. Philippe's urgent voice brought her back to the present, breaking the spell of the past. There was no time to ponder, no time for moral dilemmas or the terror of what might be discovered. A man's life was in her hands, regardless of who he was or what he represented to her past. Dr. Helena Santiago was a doctor above all else, and her first duty was to save lives. With a final, deep sigh, Helena straightened her shoulders. The mask of professionalism fell back onto her face, impenetrable. The calculated coldness that had made her one of the finest surgeons settled in again, but this time with an underlying layer of terror and determination. She had to save Arthur Delmont, not only for his life, but to protect the secret she had kept for so long. If he died, the secret would die with him, but the knowledge would haunt her forever. If he lived, she would have to face the possibility that the past, now comatose in room 312, would finally catch up with her. She walked through the door, her mind already immersed in medical procedures, but acutely aware that from that moment on, her life would never be the same. Chapter 3. The scars of the past. Arthur Delmont lay sedated, his body inert in the ICU bed, hooked up to a rhythmic symphony of machines keeping him alive. The catheterization had been a success, his arteries unclogged, his heart responding to the intervention. The immediate risk of death had diminished, but the battle for recovery was far from over. Helena watched him through the glass of the intensive care unit, her mind a whirlwind of newly awakened memories. His facial features, though more mature and marked by the fine lines of time and the responsibilities that a tycoon's life entailed, still bore the same expression she remembered, a silent determination, an intensity in his closed eyes that, even now, disturbed her. It was the same expression of the young man who left her, never knowing the truth, over 15 years ago. The hospital scene, with its controlled beeping and whispering, faded, replaced by vivid flashes of a past she had buried beneath layers of emotional concrete. The scars of that time, which she had thought had faded, now stung as afresh. Helena was a brilliant medical student, immersed in books and dissections, with a promising future mapped out for her by her family of renowned physicians. But one summer semester, everything changed. She met him in the university library, a chance encounter that became the spark for an overwhelming passion. Arthur Delmont was no medical student. He was studying economics and had a burning ambition to conquer the business world, a magnetic energy that Helena, always so methodical and focused, found irresistible. He was unlike anything she'd ever known. He didn't come from a traditional family, but he possessed a sharp intelligence, natural charisma, and unwavering willpower. His eyes, which she now saw closed in his ICU bed, were filled with an intense glow, a fire that promised to devour the world. Helena found herself inexplicably drawn to him, to his vision of the future, and to a more vulnerable side he rarely showed. Their love blossomed in secret, a forbidden romance that developed in the shadows of university campuses and bohemian cafes. For Helena's parents, who saw their daughter's future as a clear-cut one, a relationship with someone outside The mainstream was unthinkable. The family pressure was suffocating, and Helena, torn between duty and passion, felt increasingly trapped. Arthur, for his part, was focused on his own dreams, on building his empire, and the idea of fitting into the expectations of the medical elite seemed alien to him. She vividly remembered their last conversation, a painful argument under the light rain of an autumn night near the old university arch. The words, cruel and filled with despair, still echoed in her mind. She had tried to explain the pressure, the impossibility of reconciling the two worlds, but Arthur, practical and objective, could not grasp the complexity of her situation. For him, love should be enough. For her, the weight of family expectations and a predetermined future was overwhelming. "I need someone to be by my side, Arthur, not someone to drag me into the eye of a hurricane," she had cried, her tears mixing with the rain. He, with the same determined expression he now saw on her sedated face, just looked at her with deep hurt. "You chose your world, Helena, and I will build mine. There's no room for both of us in it," he replied, his voice breaking, before turning his back and disappearing into the darkness of the night. And he was gone, vanished, without an explanation. Without a formal goodbye, Helena tried to contact him, but he became a ghost. That was the abrupt end of a love that consumed her and shaped her in ways she would only understand years later. A broken heart, a wounded soul, and a secret that was beginning to germinate in her womb, a secret she carried alone. A baby. The revelation came weeks later, amidst the mourning of a lost love, the positive test, the morning sickness, the dizziness that overtook her at inopportune moments. Life, which seemed to have come to an end, was taking on a new, unexpected, and frightening beginning. Despair gripped her. How would she, a medical student with a career ahead of her, explain this to her conservative parents? How would she raise a child alone, the product of an inappropriate affair? The decision was the most painful of her life, and she kept it under lock and key. The options were few, and the fear of destroying her future and the child's future if he were recognized as Arthur's son was overwhelming. Arthur, already beginning his meteoric rise in the business world, couldn't be exposed to scandal, and she, Helena, couldn't be dragged into ignominy. She took a break from university for a while. Faking a family illness, she enlisted the help of a distant and discreet aunt, a retired nurse who had experienced her own share of heartbreak. It was a period of seclusion and pain, but also of strength she didn't know she possessed. The baby was born in secret, given up for adoption to a loving and caring family, with the promise that he would never be sought, for the safety of all involved. It was a part of her life that she had torn away and thrown away, trying to erase its existence in order to protect her future and the child's. The guilt, however, never completely left her. She dedicated herself to medicine with an almost obsessive ferocity, as if professional success could soothe the pain and emptiness left by her choice. She became Dr. Helena Santiago, the impeccable cardiac surgeon, the woman of steel who didn't allow emotions to interfere with her work. But the past, that intimate and painful secret, was her shadow, the deepest scar, a constant reminder of the sacrifice she had made. And now, Arthur Dalemont, the father of that baby she'd never seen, again was there, on her operating table, his life in her hands. She had saved him, yes, but would he survive? And if he did, what would that mean for her? The truth, kept hidden for so long, threatened to explode, destroying the delicate balance of her current life. The irony was cruel. She had sacrificed her son to protect her career and Arthur's status. Now, she was the one with the power to save his life, and the secret, once so safe, seemed to want to escape its prison. In an inevitable collision of fates, with Arthur Dalemont stabilized, though still in critical condition and sedated in the ICU, Dr. Dalemont began to examine the situation. The urgency of the surgery had passed, but the urgency of her own situation, now intertwined with his life, was just beginning. Her medical mind, trained in analysis and logical reasoning, couldn't ignore the loose ends, the dissonances she had noticed. In the few minutes she had access to Arthur's initial data, determined to better understand her patient's condition and, she confessed, To try to unravel a little more about the man resurfacing from her past, Helena headed to the nurse's station. With her authority and access as chief surgeon, she logged into the hospital system to access Arthur's complete medical records. The computer screen flashed with the tycoon's file, name, age, and hospitalization history. However, as she navigated through the tabs, a strange feeling began to set in. There were gaps. Important exam dates seemed missing, and some basic test results were incomplete or didn't make sense given the current severity of her condition. A previous routine electrocardiogram, for example, showed readings that, for someone her age and with a family history which she suspected was complicated, were exceedingly normal, almost too perfect to be credible. The sequence of events leading up to the heart attack seemed truncated, as if parts of the story had been removed or never recorded. The file felt like a jigsaw puzzle with several missing pieces. The diagnosis the attending physician had made. Upon admission, acute myocardial infarction of unknown etiology sounded far too superficial for a patient of Arthur Delmont's caliber. Helena knew that, with unlimited resources, a businessman like him should have impeccable medical care. He should have annual checkups, a detailed medical history, and a team of private doctors at his disposal. But what she saw there was the opposite, a surprisingly meager record. For someone so prominent, as Helena investigated the details, a senior nurse, Ms. Lucia, who was organizing discharge records, approached discreetly. "Is something wrong, Dr. Santiago?" she asked, noticing Helena's intense concentration. Helena hesitated for a moment, but curiosity and professionalism prevailed. "Ms. Lucia, do you have any information about Mr. Delmont's family? There's no emergency contact information on record. Not even a list of authorized persons to receive information." Lucia sighed, a look of concern crossing her experienced face. "That's strange. Doctor, no one has shown up yet. He was brought in by his company's security team. They said he fell ill at home and that his family is traveling, but they didn't give any further details. No immediate family has come to visit him or called to check on him." The information hit Helena like an electric shock. No family nearby? Arthur Delmont, the man whose fortune and influence were constantly in the media, seemed completely alone at such a critical moment. This was incongruous, even for the busy life of a billionaire. Usually, in these situations, the hospital would be invaded by lawyers, secretaries, and worried family members, all demanding updates and the best treatments. But there was nothing, just the silence and coldness of an ICU room, the absence of family members, and the inconsistencies in her medical records set off alarm bells in Helena's mind. It wasn't just a matter of medical ethics or a past that haunted her. It was the feeling that something more was at play. The keen intuition that had made her an exceptional surgeon was beeping dangerously. "Is someone trying to keep everything under wraps, Mrs. Lucia?" Helena asked quietly, almost to herself, but the nurse heard her. Lucia shook her head, her eyes wide. "I can't say, doctor, but this is the first time I've seen such an important patient in such a serious condition, with no one to accompany him. His secretary called a little while ago, just to confirm that he's well taken care of and to ask that we keep this information to the press." "We won't release anything to the press," Helena repeated, the echo of the words echoing in her mind. This wasn't just secrecy, it was an active effort to hide it. But what and why? Suddenly, the image of Arthur in his hospital bed took on a new dimension. He wasn't just the patient she'd saved and the man from her past. He was, perhaps, a victim of something larger, of a hidden plot that now enveloped him in his most vulnerable state. The gaps in his medical records, the absence of his family, the request for silence, it all fit together into a disturbing narrative. Helena felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the hospital's air conditioning. The complexity of Arthur Delmont's case went far beyond his ailing heart. She had sworn to save lives, but this particular life seemed to come with a host of complications that could threaten not only his recovery but also her own safety, and that of the secret she carried. Dr. Helena Santiago knew there was more than a medical diagnosis in those incomplete records. There was a story, a tangled web of secrets and perhaps dangers that she felt she would be forced to unravel. The instinct to protect both her patient and herself stirred with renewed force. She couldn't ignore it. Not now. Fate seemed to be pulling her into a dangerous game, and the main pawn was Arthur Dalemont. She had to uncover the truth behind the hidden file before it was too late for him or for her. Chapter 5. Helena's Secret. The ICU, with its controlled rhythm of medical beeps and whispers, became a stage of silent anguish for Helena. Arthur Dalemont, now more stable and out of imminent danger, remained in a medically induced coma, his life suspended in a fragile limbo. Each breath the machines helped him take felt like a vivid reminder of the truth she had buried, a truth that now, with him so vulnerable, began to haunt her with overwhelming intensity. The truth, she called it a mistake in her moments of self-loathing, or a choice when she tried to rationalize the weight of her decisions. But no matter the label, the fact was undeniable. Arthur was the father of the son she had given up for adoption 15 years ago. The memory of that time was a cold specter. The unplanned pregnancy, the pressure from her traditional family, her father, a renowned and inflexible surgeon, and her mother, an elegant woman who valued her image and social standing above all else. Helena, a young medical student with a brilliant future ahead of her, found herself at an impossible crossroads. Her romance with Arthur, an aspiring businessman without a significant surname, was already considered an unacceptable mistake. Revealing a pregnancy, and even more so, the paternity of this man her parents considered an adventurer, would be the end. The end of her career, the end of her respectability, the end of her life as she knew it. She remembered the shame, the paralyzing fear that gripped her. There was no one to share it with. Arthur had disappeared after their last argument, immersed in his own ambitious career plans. He didn't know she carried a part of him, a life they had created together. Helena tried calling, texting old numbers, but he had cut all ties with his college past, focused solely on his advancement. Alone and isolated, Helena sought refuge in the only person she trusted completely, her Aunt Eliza. Aunt Eliza was an eccentric figure, a retired nurse who had worked in rural hospitals and knew the secrets and complexities of life away from the public spotlight. It was Eliza who helped her keep her pregnancy a secret, arranging for her to take medical leave from college under the guise of a mysterious illness, requiring bed rest on a secluded farm. It was Eliza who was by her side during the silent and painful birth in a small private clinic, away from the prying eyes of her family. And it was Eliza who helped her make the most difficult decision of her life, giving the baby up for adoption. The choice was presented as the only way to guarantee a future for the child, away from scandal and judgment, and a future for Helena, who could then resume her studies and career while maintaining her family's honor. The adoptive couple, carefully selected by Eliza's discreet network of contacts, were loving and financially stable, unable to have biological children. The promise was a happy life, without the shadow of an absent father and a mother forced into hiding. Helena had signed the adoption papers with trembling hands and a broken heart. That moment haunted her darkest nightmares. The image of the tiny body wrapped in blankets, the baby smell on her clothes for days on end, the emptiness in her arms. She had built a wall around that trauma, convincing herself she had done the right thing, the only thing possible for everyone involved. Dr. Helena Santiago, the successful surgeon, was living proof that the sacrifice had been worth it. But now, with Arthur Dalemont there, a frail, unconscious man, the specter of truth danced before her eyes. If he woke, if he somehow remembered her, though she doubted he would recognize her after so many years and under such circumstances, and if by some miracle or some tragedy of fate he learned about his son, what would happen then? The mere thought terrified her, the revelation of a secret son, given up for adoption without the knowledge of his father, a tycoon with no known heirs, would be a scandal that would sweep the country. Her reputation would be shattered. The press, already covering Arthur Dalemont avidly, would devour every detail. Mount Sinai would be dragged into the center of an unprecedented ethical controversy. Her medical license would be revoked, her career in ruins. Everything she had built, all her years of effort and sacrifice, would crumble in an instant. More than that, there was the fear of how Arthur would react. He was a powerful man, accustomed to control. The idea that he had fathered a child she had hidden from him for so long was a ticking time bomb. What would he do if he found out? The pain, the anger, the disappointment. He could use all of his power and influence to exact revenge, to destroy the life she had fought so hard to preserve. Helena tried to calm herself, taking deep breaths, inhaling the familiar scent of the hospital that, for years, had been her sanctuary, her fortress against the past. She had saved his life. That was what mattered now. But she couldn't ignore the feeling that, by saving Arthur, she had inadvertently pulled a trigger. He could wake at any moment, and with his awakening, Helena's secret, hidden for over a decade and a half, could finally come to light, bringing with it not only chaos, but also the inevitable confrontation with the choices that shaped and haunted her throughout her life. Dr. Helena Santiago was about to face the truth of her own past, with the man who held the key to her destruction or her liberation lying in her ICU bed. The journey home that rainy morning, after another exhausting shift, and the emotional toll of Arthur's revelation, was a blur for Helena. The smell of the hospital still clung to her clothes, but it was the soft scent of home, fresh coffee, and the familiarity of her apartment in the upscale MoMA neighborhood that brought her back to reality. The dim light of dawn filtered through the living room windows, revealing the controlled chaos of a busy life. Medical books stacked on the coffee table, a coat thrown over the sofa, Gustavo's school backpack leaning against the wall. Helena took off her shoes, feeling immediate relief, and walked toward her son's room. The door was ajar. She pushed it gently, and the sound of quiet breathing filled the silence. There he was, Gustavo, lying on the messy bed, wrapped in blankets, the serene face of a teenager sound asleep. His light brown hair fell over his forehead, and one arm was stretched out, dangling over the edge of the bed. 15 years. 15 years had passed since that painful decision, and there stood living proof of her sacrifice, her resilience, and her unconditional love. Gustavo was the light of her life, the source of her strength, the pillar of her existence. She had raised him alone, with the discreet and loving support of Aunt Eliza, the only confidant of her secret. He was a cheerful, intelligent boy with an easy smile and a curious outlook on the world. Helena sat on the edge of the bed, watching him. Gustavo's features were a blend of hers and Arthur's, but she had worked tirelessly to obscure any striking resemblance to her biological father. His eyes, though the same shade of blue as hers, held a glint of intelligence and insight that subtly reminded her of Arthur. The shape of his nose, a slightly prominent chin, these were details only someone who knew Arthur intimately would notice, and Helena noticed them every day. Gustavo never knew who his father was. To him, his father was an absent figure, a story Helena had told with the delicacy of a protective lie. She always said his father had died in an accident before he was born, a sad tale, but one that didn't raise any major questions or ghosts. It was a story that spared her from more complex and painful truths, and above all, shielded Gustavo from the confusion and potential pain of a father who didn't know him. She had protected him, kept him safe in her bubble of maternal love. Far from the complexities of his past, she had promised herself, the day she signed the adoption papers and later, when she decided to raise Gustavo, that she would never involve Arthur in this story. Arthur Delmont's life was distant, a world of power and wealth that didn't connect with the simple, dedicated life she had built for herself and her son. He was a name in the headlines, not a parental figure, and Helena was determined to maintain that unbreakable barrier. But now, fate seemed to have other plans, and those plans were cruel and ironic. Arthur Delmont was there, in the hospital where she worked, on her operating table, a life she had saved, and he was Gustavo's father. Dr. Helena Santiago, the woman who mastered the complexities of the human heart in high-risk surgeries, felt her own heart tighten in her chest. What would happen if Arthur woke up? Would he recognize her? What if, by some twist of fate, he discovered Gustavo's existence? The thought of her son, to whom she had dedicated every fiber of her being confronted with a father who never reached out to him, a father so powerful and distant, was unbearable. Gustavo was innocent, oblivious to all this complexity. Did he deserve the truth, or was the protective lie she had maintained for so many years truly what was best for him? A silent tear ran down Helena's face, marking her tired skin. It wasn't just the protection of her career that drove her, but a visceral fear of seeing Gustavo hurt. Arthur's world, with all its grandeur and potential scandals, wasn't the world she wanted her son to live in. Simplicity, love, normality, that was what she always longed for Gustavo. She lightly touched her son's hair, a gesture of affection and possessiveness. He stirred, letting out a small groan, but remained asleep. Helena stood up, the decision solidifying in her mind. She could not allow this secret, this part of her past, to erupt and destroy Gustavo's peace. She would protect him at all costs, even if it meant facing Arthur Delmont head-on and maintaining the pretense. No matter how difficult, the night had revealed Arthur's vulnerability, but it had also awakened a mother's ferocity in Helena. She would save her son's father, but he would do everything in his power to ensure his father never learned of his son's existence. The line she had drawn to protect Gustavo seemed about to be tested, and Helena knew the coming battle would not be fought just in the hospital, but in the minefield of her own past and in the hearts of her newly threatened family. Fate seemed to laugh at her plans, weaving an intricate web that connected everyone, whether they wanted it or not. Chapter 7. The return of consciousness. The sterile environment of the ICU, which for Helena had become a mix of battlefield and refuge, was in a state of watchful calm. Arthur Delmont had spent days in an induced coma, his body waging a silent struggle for recovery. The medical team, led by Helena, monitored every heartbeat, every breath, every sign of improvement. The apprehension was palpable, not only because of the critical condition of a high-profile patient, but for Helena, because of the imminent collision of her present with a past she had worked so hard to bury. It was a Tuesday morning when the first clear signs began to emerge. A subtle twitching of the eyelids, a barely perceptible movement of the fingers. Helena was making her rounds, reviewing the charts and adjusting the medications, when she noticed the change. Her heart leaped in her chest, a mixture of professional relief and personal dread. "Dr. Philippe, he's starting to react," Helena murmured, her voice maintaining a practiced calm, but with a note of subtle tension. Philippe, the resident, approached quickly, his eyes fixed on the monitors, his brain waves, previously nearly flat, under the effects of sedation, showed increasing activity. Arthur's pupil reacted to the light, an encouraging sign. With precise movements, Helena began the gradual withdrawal of the sedatives. The following hours were spent anxiously waiting. The hospital, a constant stage for human drama, seemed to hold its breath for the man's awakening, and Helena, more than anyone, felt the weight of each passing minute. In the afternoon, the moment arrived. Arthur Delmont's eyes slowly opened, blinking against the soft light of the ICU room. They were clouded with confusion and the weakness of recent sedation, but gradually, a flicker of consciousness began to shine through them. He tried to move, a faint moan escaping his dry lips. Helena stood beside the bed, her professional expression impeccable. "Mr. Delmont, can you hear me? You're at Mount Sinai Hospital. You had a heart attack, but the surgery was successful. You're safe now." Her voice was soft, reassuring, devoid of any personal emotion. Arthur's eyes moved slowly, scanning the room, trying to focus. He seemed lost, his brain trying to process where he was and what had happened. His blurry vision passed over the nurses, the equipment, until, for a moment, it rested on Helena's face. And then, he froze. The confusion in his eyes gave way to shock, surprise, and finally, an unspeakable recognition. It was as if the fog of sedation had lifted, revealing a disturbing clarity. That look, he remembered. Helena felt a shiver run down her spine, a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. Their eyes met, in that sudden silence of the ICU, where only the steady beep of the monitors could be heard. A whirlwind of emotions exploded, without a single word being spoken. The 15 years that separated them vanished, the scene at the university, the rain, the abrupt goodbye, the hidden secrets. It all hung in the invisible air between them. In Arthur's eyes, Helena saw a myriad of feelings: surprise at finding her there, curiosity about how she had become the doctor who saved him, and a glimpse of something deeper, something that seemed to question reality itself. Did he remember not just her face, but everything they had shared? Helena, for her part, felt her heart race. Her body screamed for flight, for hiding, but her professionalism kept her grounded. Her own eyes, though maintaining her outward composure, betrayed an internal struggle. There was a latent fear there, yes, but also a twinge of curiosity, of an old pain that still throbbed. Arthur tried to speak, his lips moving, but only a hoarse whisper escaped. He reached out a weak hand toward her, a hesitant gesture that made her breath catch. Helena. He managed to whisper, the name coming out with difficulty, but with a clarity that pierced the armor she had built. It wasn't Dr. Santiago, it was Helena, the name he had called so many times in another time, in another place. Time stood still. Helena felt the ground beneath her feet tremble. That simple name, spoken by him after so many years, was the confirmation of her worst fears. He recognized her, completely, not as the renowned doctor, but as the woman from his past. Nurse Sonia, who was adjusting the IV pump, noticed the tension in the air, but attributed it to Helena's fatigue. Dr. Santiago, he seems well-oriented. Great work. Helena simply nodded, unable to take her eyes off Arthur. He was watching her, questioning, remembering, and the weight of the secret, of the child who was theirs, seemed to quadruple, threatening to crush her. That moment, the return of Arthur's consciousness, was the beginning of a new phase, one where the past could no longer be ignored. The web of secrets she had woven so carefully was about to snap. Chapter 8. Unanswered questions. The days following Arthur Delmont's awakening were an agonizing ordeal for Helena. The magnet, though still weak and recovering, displayed a growing lucidity and curiosity that kept her constantly alert. The ICU, once a haven of professionalism, became a minefield of memories and unspoken truths. Arthur, with the persistence that had made him one of the most successful men in the country, began asking questions, not directly, but with a subtlety that betrayed his sharp intelligence. Dr. Santiago, it's quite a coincidence that you're here, isn't it? He would say, his blue eyes so similar to Gustavo's fixed on hers, searching for a reaction. The world seems small when you're on the brink of death. Helena maintained her impeccable posture, responding with courteous professionalism. You're a renowned cardiac surgeon. From what I read, he would continue, testing the waters. Did my people have any luck finding you, or did you find me? She deflected, always with the same controlled calm. Mount Sinai Hospital has one of the best teams in the country, Mr. Delmont. Any of us would have done the same. But beneath the surface, Helena felt the pressure. Arthur's questions were like needles, poking at the wounds of her past, threatening to break through the barrier she had built. Nurse Sonia and Dr. Philippe noticed the tension, but attributed it to the complexity of the case and the demanding temperament of such an important patient. They didn't notice Arthur's lingering gazes, the way he observed Helena's every movement, every micro-expression on her face. He remembered her. That was undeniable. But how much did he remember, and what exactly was he trying to figure out? One afternoon, while Helena was adjusting her medication dosage, Arthur, his voice still hoarse but stronger, asked a question that caught her off guard. Do you have children, Dr. Santiago? A family waiting for you at home? The seemingly innocent question struck Helena like a bolt of lightning. It was an unexpected intrusion, a vivid reminder of the life she had built away from him, away from the secret. For a split second, her hand trembled and she almost dropped the vial. Gustavo's face flashed in her mind. Yes, Mr. Delmont. I have a son, she replied, her voice a little more dry than usual. Her armor of professionalism cracking for a moment, she turned away, avoiding his gaze, focusing on the monitors. It was a slip, a small but significant lapse. In her facade of unbreakable composure, Arthur noticed. His eyes narrowed slightly. He saw the hesitation, the change in her voice, the quick gesture to avoid eye contact. It was a crack in the wall she had so carefully erected. From that moment on, Arthur's suspicions solidified. He remembered the past, their university days, the intensity of what they had experienced. He remembered the young Helena, with her bright blue eyes and restrained passion. Now here she was, a strong, mature woman, a respected surgeon, but she clearly avoided him. He couldn't understand why. The puzzle pieces of Arthur's past were beginning to fall into place. He remembered the abrupt end, the way Helena had disappeared from his life. At the time, he had interpreted it as her choice, a rejection of his ambitious world. But now, seeing her there, with that hint of pain in her eyes as he approached her, he sensed there was something more. He watched as Helena gave orders, instructed the residents, and moved with the precision of her profession. She was a force of nature in the hospital, but when he caught her in quiet moments, when she thought no one was looking, he saw something different, a deep melancholy, a weariness that went beyond the physical, and sometimes when she looked at him, there was a sadness so intense he could have sworn her eyes were silently crying, even though no tears were falling. Why did she avoid him so intensely? Why did there seem to be so much pain in her eyes when he tried to get closer? When he tried to unravel the mystery of her presence there? The fact that she had a son, a life he didn't know, only heightened the intrigue. He was Arthur Dalemont, a man who always got what he wanted, who unlocked the secrets of the business world. And now, the secret before him was this woman, Helena Santiago. He had a feeling there was something crucial he didn't know, something that connected them in a way deeper than the mere coincidence of a patient and his doctor. With each passing day, Arthur felt stronger, but also more determined to unravel the enigma that Helena represented. The unanswered questions tormented him. He needed to know what she was hiding, and why the life he had built seemed so empty compared to the life he now glimpsed she had. The cat-and-mouse game was just beginning, and Arthur, with his new lucidity, was ready to play. Arthur Delmont's recovery was progressing rapidly. He had been transferred from the ICU to a private room, a luxurious space at Mount Sinai that felt more like a hotel room than a hospital ward. Helena remained his primary care physician, a routine that kept her on constant alert. She strove to limit their interactions to the strictly professional, but Arthur, with his newfound energy and growing suspicion, seemed determined to break down her defenses. It was on a sunny afternoon, as Helena was preparing to leave after a round, that the inevitable happened. Gustavo, on a rare visit to the hospital to deliver a book Helena had forgotten at home, walked the halls with the natural ease of someone who had been there since childhood. He didn't like hospitals, but his mother had insisted, and he loved her too much to deny it. Arthur, feeling stronger, had insisted on taking a short walk down the floor's hallway, accompanied by a nurse. He needed air, movement, anything to take his mind off that room and his incessant thoughts of Helena. As he turned a corner, his eyes met a young man coming in the opposite direction. The boy was tall for his age, with a confident but slightly awkward posture typical of adolescence. His hair was light brown, charmingly messy, and his eyes were an intense blue, almost identical to Helena's. They were the same eyes that had haunted his thoughts for the past few days. Arthur froze. The impact was almost physical. There was something about the boy that completely unhinged him. It wasn't just the shade of blue in his eyes, but the way they shone with a precocious intelligence, a curiosity veiled behind a certain shyness. The way he carried his books, a little disorganized, but with the air of someone absorbing knowledge. It was as if he were seeing a younger version of himself, not in a mirror, but in a projection of the past. Gustavo, oblivious to the storm his presence was causing, noticed the man standing in the hallway, staring at him with a strange intensity. He smiled politely, a smile that disarmed Arthur, an easy, almost insolent smile, one he knew all too well. The nurse accompanying Arthur, noticing the sudden pause, asked, "Is everything okay, Mr. Dalemont? Do you want me to call Dr. Santiago?" Hearing Helena's name made Arthur's puzzle click into place. Helena had a son. She had confessed this, with a twinge of nervousness he now understood perfectly. A son who, by all accounts, was exactly the same age. Before Arthur could process everything, Gustavo spotted Helena coming out of Arthur's room. "Mom, I found you," he exclaimed, books swinging in his hands as he ran toward her. The word mother echoed in Arthur's ears like thunder. He saw the shock on Helena's face, the way she stiffened, the surprise and panic that crossed her eyes. She quickly hugged Gustavo, as if to protect him from something or someone. From his gaze, Helena turned to Arthur, her face pale. "Mr. Dalemont, how are you? I see you've met my son, Gustavo." Her voice was forcedly casual, but Arthur could feel the tension, the urgency in her tone. Arthur simply nodded, unable to take his eyes off Gustavo, who now looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and youthful innocence. The resemblance was undeniable, striking, that penetrating gaze, the way he held his head, a certain natural charm reminiscent of his youth, even the way he spoke, with a slight hesitation before expressing himself fully. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Dalemont," Gustavo said, extending his hand to Arthur. "My mother speaks highly of you. She said you're a very important patient." Helena's mention of him, the way Gustavo treated him with respect, but not reverence, only reinforced the connections Arthur was forming in his mind. He shook the boy's hand, feeling an electric shock. Gustavo's hands, though young, were shaped like his own. He looked at Helena, a million questions in his eyes. The question about Gustavo's mother was one of them, but now a much bigger, scarier, and more important one was forming. A tense silence hung between the three of them, heavy with unspoken truths. Helena, feeling the weight of Arthur's gaze and Gustavo's innocence, acted quickly. "Gustavo, we need to go. I have some appointments now. Mr. Dalemont, I'm sorry, but I need to end my visit for today." She led him quickly, almost dragging her son down the hallway. Her steps hurried, as if fleeing from a revelation. But for Arthur, it was too late. Gustavo's image, the shocking resemblance, Helena's name as mother, the pieces fell into place with devastating precision. Helena's mistake, her choice, the secret that had haunted her for 15 years. The son she claimed to have. He wasn't just a son, he was their son. That boy was his son. Arthur staggered, feeling weak again, not from the illness, but from the impact of that monumental truth. Everything made sense now. Helena's reluctance, her silently crying eyes, her haste to push him away. The gaps in the medical record that he now realized were intended to conceal a previous life. He had had a son, and that son was there, right in front of him, unaware that his father was the patient his mother was treating, the tycoon, who had always controlled everything in his life. Felt a tidal wave of emotions, shock, anger, a pang, of grief for lost time, but also a spark of something new, something he never thought he would feel. Fatherhood. The truth Helena had hidden for so long had been revealed in a chance encounter. And now, Arthur Dalemont was determined to uncover every detail of the life she had hidden from him, starting with the boy who looked so much like him. Chapter 10. The truth that changed everything. Night fell over Mount Sinai Hospital, but for Helena, the darkness outside was a mirror of the storm brewing within. She knew the encounter between Arthur and Gustavo was the trigger. There was no more retreat, no more hiding. The tension was a taut cable about to snap. As soon as she finished her duties at the hospital, Helena received a message from Arthur. "We need to talk. In my room." Now, it wasn't a request. It was a veiled order, imbued with the authority he wielded in every area of her life, and she knew she couldn't postpone the inevitable. Entering Arthur's room, Helena found him sitting in the armchair by the window, gazing out at the cityscape at night, but with an intensity that suggested his mind was elsewhere. The pallor still marred his face, but his eyes, once clouded by illness, now shone with a piercing clarity, full of questions and silent pain. He turned when she entered, and the look he gave her was a mixture of accusation and desolation. "There was no beating around the bush, Helena," he began, his voice low but carrying a force that made her tremble. "The boy, Gustavo, he's my son, isn't he?" The question, so direct, took her breath away. Helena felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. She had rehearsed this moment in her nightmares for years, but the reality was far more brutal. Her eyes filled with tears that she desperately fought back. It was time. "Yes, Arthur," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Gustavo is your son." The confession hung in the air, thick and heavy. The truth, which she had kept hidden for over 15 years, was finally there, exposed, raw. Arthur closed his eyes for a moment, as if absorbing the blow. and then opened them again, fixing them on Helena. There was no more anger expressed, only an immense emptiness. A profound betrayal mingled with the pain of lost time. "Why, Helena?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Why did you hide this from me, a son, our son?" Her words came rushing out, the dam of emotions finally breaking. She told him her story. The pressure from her family, the fear of ruining her career and his. She explained the pain of the choice, the loneliness of pregnancy, the sacrifice she believed was necessary to protect everyone. She spared no detail of the desperation that led her to give the baby up for adoption, and then the decision, driven by love that overcame her fear, to raise him as her own. Keeping the truth a secret. "I swore to protect you, Arthur, to protect you from that scandal, to protect myself from the shame, and to protect Gustavo from a world I didn't know would accept him. I raised him alone, with all the love I could give, trying to erase the past." Helena confessed, tears flowing freely now. "I know it was wrong not to tell you, but I was so scared." Arthur listened in silence, his expression inscrutable. With each word, a universe of lost possibilities opened up. A son, an heir, a piece of himself he never knew existed, growing under the same roof as the woman he had loved and lost. The anger he expected to feel overwhelmingly was mixed with deep pain and an immense emptiness. Empty of 15 years of his son's life, of laughter, of first steps, of being a father, empty of a family he never knew he could have. The man who had built an empire, who controlled fortunes and destinies, felt completely powerless in the face of that truth. His professional success seemed hollow, meaningless compared to the magnitude of what had been taken away. But amidst the pain and anger, another emotion began to emerge, shy but persistent, a new sensation. He looked at Helena, her eyes still teary, but with a strength he recognized. And then he thought of Gustavo, the boy with the piercing eyes and easy smile. His son, a son who seemed to inherit the best of both of them. Arthur Dalemont had always been a man of vision, of moving forward, of building, and in that moment, he felt a spark, a chance to reclaim something he had unknowingly lost, a chance to fill that immense void, a chance to start over. Gustavo. Arthur repeated his son's name, tasting it in his mouth, as if trying to taste it. The pain was still there. Helena's betrayal was an open wound, but the image of the boy overshadowed everything. The truth had shattered everything Helena and Arthur knew. The walls Helen had erected crumbled. Arthur's life, once so focused on business and power, now had a new center, a new purpose. The revelation not only shattered the past and present, but opened an uncertain path to the future, a future that, for the first time in a long time, seemed to have new meaning, new hope. Chapter 11. The Wounds of Time. The revelation of the truth opened a chasm between Arthur and Helena, and at the same time, a precarious bridge connecting their lives. The pain of Helena's confession was immense, but Arthur's pain was that of a man confronted with a stolen past. He was determined to fill the void left by 15 years of absence, but reality imposed itself with the force of a blow. Arthur, with his characteristic impatience, tried to get closer to Gustavo. He called Helena, asking permission to visit, him to explain. Helena, though hesitant, knew this confrontation was inevitable. She prepared Gustavo as best she could, revealing to him, in parts, the complex history of his biological father. The teenager's reaction was, as expected, a mixture of shock, anger, and profound confusion. Arthur's first attempt to connect with Gustavo was a disaster. The meeting took place in Helena's living room, a neutral ground she hoped would ease the tension. Arthur, still fragile but with an aura of power surrounding him, tried to explain, offer, and make amends. "Gustavo, I know this is a lot for you," Arthur began, his voice a little choked. I didn't know about you. If I had known, Gustavo cut him off, his words thick with adolescent resentment. "You didn't know, and what would you do if you did, Buy me, put my name on one of your companies. I don't need your money, Mr. Dalemont. I had a mother who raised me, who devoted herself to me. Where were you all this time?" The attack was direct, brutal in its honesty. Arthur felt the words like knives. He had prepared himself for anger, but the rejection from his own son, A boy he saw as his own for the first time was crushing. He, the tycoon who moved worlds, was powerless in the face of a teenager's hurt. Helena watched the scene, her heart heavy. She had foreseen this. The wounds of time wouldn't heal in a day, nor in a conversation. She tried to mediate, to intervene, but Gustavo was in a state of justified rebellion. "Son, please listen to what your father has to say," Helena intervened, using the word father for the first time so openly, feeling the weight and strangeness. "My father," Gustavo laughed bitterly, "my father has been dead to me my whole life. And now he shows up, a millionaire, sick, and wants to fix everything with an apology? I'm not a stock for you to trade." He stood up abruptly, his eyes watery but filled with contained fury. "I don't know you, Mr. Dalemont, and frankly, I don't want to." Gustavo ran to his room, slamming the door behind him, leaving a heavy silence. And the echo of his words in the room, Arthur sank deeper into his chair, his face contorted with pain. He had faced down sharks in the business world, overcome financial crises, but nothing compared to that young man's rejection. "I'm so sorry, Arthur," Helena said, sitting on the sofa across from him, exhaustion weighing heavily on her shoulders. "I knew it wouldn't be easy. He's hurt. He has every right to be." Arthur looked up at her, a mixture of sadness and accusation. "Hurt? Helena, you stole 15 years from me, 15 years of my son's life. How could you?" Arthur's words were sharp, but Helena didn't shy away. "I did what I thought was right at the time, Arthur. For Gustavo, for myself, and yes, for you. To protect you from a scandal that would have ruined what you were building. I made the choice as a young woman, alone and terrified. Felt she needed to make to survive." The discussion dragged on, revisiting the wounds of a past that still bled. The ghosts that had separated them: social pressure, fear, lack of communication. Their shared pride resurfaced, more vivid than ever. Arthur, a man accustomed to control, felt powerless. Helena, the woman who had kept the secret for so long, felt the weight of guilt and the pain of seeing her son suffer. Helena knew she was the only one who could build a bridge between the painful past and a possible future. She needed to be the mediator, the anchor for both. Her love for Gustavo was what drove her. She had to help Arthur understand that it wasn't about money or power, but about patience, respect, and the willingness to rebuild a relationship from scratch. "You can't force him, Arthur," Helena explained, her voice softer now. "He needs time. He needs to process all of this, and you need it too. It's not just him who's angry. You're angry at me and angry at yourself for not knowing." Arthur looked away, his expression a mix of pain and familiar stubbornness. Helena's words were harsh, but true. He had been a man who built his life alone, focused on his ambition, and the idea of having a child had always seemed distant. Now, reality hit him with the force of a tsunami. He wanted Gustavo in his life, but he didn't know how. The path to healing the wounds of time would be long and painful. It would require more than Helena and Arthur imagined. It would require them to face not only the ghosts that separated them in the past, but also the pain and anger of the present. But perhaps by going through this ordeal together, they could finally heal what still bled and build a new chapter in their lives. Months had passed since the tumultuous revelation, and time, with its relentless passage and healing power, had begun to mend the wounds that seemed insurmountable. The lives of the three, Helena, Arthur, and Gustavo, had changed irreversibly. Helena's home, once a safe haven for secrets, was now a stage for the complexities of a new family in the making. Arthur Dalemont, the tycoon who had faced death and discovered a son, channeled his immense energy and resources into something that transcended the business world. Driven by the pain of lost time and a burning desire to make a difference in the lives of his son and other children, he transformed part of his vast fortune. With surprising dedication for someone so focused on profits, he founded the Gustavo Dalemont Institute of Pediatric Research, a center of excellence focused on pediatric heart disease, equipped with cutting-edge technology and the best professionals in the country. It was his legacy, his apology in action, a tangible manifestation of the love he was learning to feel. Gustavo, at first, remained distant. His anger didn't disappear overnight, but Arthur's quiet persistence, lack of pressure, and genuine effort to be present began to have an effect. Arthur didn't force him to call him dad, but invited him to basketball games, listened to his teenage dilemmas, discussed books, and slowly, with Helena's careful mediation, a fragile bond began to form. The visits to the Institute, the pride in seeing his own name on such a grand project, made Gustavo see Arthur not just as the millionaire who abandoned him, but as a man who was truly trying. For Helena, the change was even more profound. The release of the secret that had suffocated her for so long brought a lightness she hadn't known existed. The guilt, once a constant shadow, began to dissipate, replaced by renewed hope. She saw Arthur no longer as the man who had left her without knowing the truth, but as the man who had returned, transformed by adversity and willing to fight for a family he had discovered too late. She watched him visit Gustavo, hesitant at first, then more confident. She saw the glint of pride in Arthur's eyes when Gustavo spoke of his future, of the engineering degree he dreamed of pursuing. And amidst this reconstruction, Helena found herself smiling again, a genuine smile that hadn't graced her face for a long time. The conversations between Helena and Arthur, previously tense and full of veiled accusations, became gentler, more open. They talked about Gustavo, the Institute, and gradually about each other. Memories of the past, once painful, were now revisited with a new perspective. The understanding that the circumstances of their youth and the mistakes they had made were part of the journey that had brought them here. One night, as they watched Gustavo sleep after a visit to the Institute, Arthur took Helena's hand. Their fingers intertwined naturally, a gesture that had once been forbidden and lost. "Thank you, Helena," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Thank you for saving my life and for giving me the chance to meet our son." Helena looked at him, her blue eyes meeting his. There was no longer any need to hide, to protect herself. The man before her was no longer the ghost of her past, but a potential partner, someone who shared with her the greatest and most unexpected blessing of their lives. That heart that had once broken and which she had healed on her operating table was now beating to a different rhythm, a rhythm of gratitude and a love that was beginning to reawaken. Slowly, with the caution of someone rebuilding something precious, Helena rediscovered love in the man who had once left her in the dark. It wasn't the impetuous love of youth, but a more mature love, forged in pain and resilience, rooted in shared experience and the deep connection that was Gustavo. They didn't speak of picking up where they left off, but of starting something new, something that incorporated the scars of the past and the hopes of the future. Because now, with the truth exposed and the wounds healing, no one needed to hide their feelings anymore. Not Helena, not Arthur, not Gustavo. The family, once torn apart by secrets, was finding its own form, its own harmony, united by a heart that, despite all the trials, still yearned for love.